Welcome, everybody, and welcome to those who are watching online through our stream. It's a nice option for this year. My name is Dr. Drew Sweet. I'm an assistant professor of evolutionary biology here at Arkansas State. It's my immense pleasure to welcome you to our Darwin Day lecture. A couple of other thanks to give before we get started. So I'd like to thank other members of the Darwin Day committee.
Oops, wrong button. Thank you.
There we go, all right. Other members of the Darwin Day committee, Dr. Marty Huss, Dr. Steve Mullen, Dr. Karen Poole, Dr. Karen Yanowitz, and our graduate student representative, M. Donahue. I'd also like to thank the Department of Biological Sciences and the College of Science and Mathematics for sponsoring the events. And of course, to the A-State Museum for hosting this event and a couple other events we've had this week. If you haven't visited this museum before, or even if you have, I highly recommend coming to visit. They have some really great exhibits about the cultural and natural history of this part of the country, including some exhibits on fossils, which you'll hear about today. So I highly recommend coming to visit during their normal operating hours. A couple of other quick notes. If you need to use the restroom, you can exit out this door here and take a right, and they're right there. Also, afterwards, we're going to have a small reception in room 157, where if you want to chat with our speaker or others, we'll have some cheese and crackers and fruits and some drinks if you want to join. That is also to the right, so if you want to go to that reception, come and take a right down to the end of the hall. The door is at the end there. We're also going to have a survey for you to fill out if you'd like to get feedback on how this event went. If you put your email, you'll be entered into a drawing for one of three $20 gift cards. So incentive to fill out the survey. So please join us afterwards and fill out the survey. Just a quick introduction about Darwin Day as a whole. Why do we have something called Darwin Day? We do this every year in mid-February because it falls in line with Charles Darwin's birthday. He was born on February 12th, 1809. We're also joining many other universities, colleges, and other institutions that are hosting Darwin Day events at this time of year. I saw on Instagram that Cincinnati Zoo is having a Darwin Day this week, and so there's a lot of other organizations that are doing this at this time of year. And so Darwin was not the first person to develop ideas about how and why biodiversity originates, but his ideas that were centered around common ancestry and natural selection, which he first published in his book, which he called an abstract, 600-page abstract, on the origin of species in 1859. His ideas were revolutionary, and they really laid a foundation for much of modern biology today. Okay, and although evolutionary theory has since expanded and tweaked since 1859, it was a long time ago, especially with things like modern genetics, as we understand a little bit more about the world around us, Darwin's ideas launched really a new framework for viewing life on Earth. Evolution is not so much a subfield of biology as it is a lens through which we view biology, or to quote famous evolutionary biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky in his 1973 article, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Darwin Day is therefore not necessarily a celebration of Darwin himself, but an opportunity and a nice alliteration for the day to highlight how evolution plays an integral role in understanding how life works, both now and in the past, as we will learn today. So one area that's especially relevant to evolutionary biology is paleontology, which is our theme this year. Darwin himself was really interested in fossils, and actually one of his main roles on the famous Voyage of the Beagle was as a geologist to collect fossils from all over the world. So he had a very strong interest in paleontology. And so we have several paleontology-themed events this year, including this evening's presentation. And so I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, ReBecca Hunt Foster. She is the park paleontologist at Dinosaur National Monument in Colorado. ReBecca is an Arkansas native, actually, so she's coming back from Western Arkansas. She attended high school in Arkansas and also University of Arkansas in Fayetteville for her undergrad. She went on to do a master's at Texas Tech University, and since then has worked various positions as a paleontologist, including for the Bureau of Land Management and now with the National Park Service at her current position. We're very excited to hear about your work as a paleontologist. Just so you know, there will be an opportunity to answer or ask some questions at the end. I'll have a microphone we have for our live stream, so when you ask a question, make sure you raise a hand. I'll bring a microphone to you so that those online can hear. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Can you all hear me all right up there? Awesome. So today I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the dinosaurs that have been found in the state of Arkansas. And as I built this talk, because this wasn't one I had in a can, I made this talk just for y'all. I found lots of other cool things to share, so I had to give it a subtitle. And it's other cool fossils too. So I grew up in Oklahoma and Arkansas, and growing up in this neck of the woods, there weren't a ton of dinosaurs to see all over the place. And it really wasn't even on my radar as a little kid. It wasn't until later that I got interested in fossils. And living in this state, I had to write to other paleontologists to find out more about them and go to my library and read as many books as I could. And so my mom was a librarian. So this was the book that she first brought home to me about dinosaurs and fossils that really kind of got me super interested in paleontology. I remember taking this book. My dad's also a pastor. I remember taking this book to church camp and reading it at night and hiding it under my pillow. But it just really inspired me and made me really curious to learn more. And I just read everything I could get my hands on from then. And my mom, knowing, the area where we came from, she's like, "Are you really sure this is what you want to do?" And I was like, "Yeah, this is what I want to do." So she's like, "Let's go check some stuff out." So when I was in high school, the year between my junior and senior year, she took me on a road trip and drove me all the way to Canada. And we stopped at all the little fossil places along the way, all the little museums. And one of the places that we happened to stop at is where I currently work today, is Dinosaur National Monument. So I went to high school here in Mulberry, Arkansas. And we drove all the way from Mulberry to Dinosaur, where I work today, all the way up to Canada looking at fossil sites. And this photo just cracks me up because I wish I could go back and tell little, 16, 17-year-old me, someday I would get to work there and walk on that wall and study these fossils. I don't think I would have believed myself. So it's kind of cool. So if it's something you're interested in, you never know where you're going to end up. Dinosaur National Monument, where I work today, is located on the border between Utah and Colorado. If you haven't been, I hope you can come sometime. Has anybody been? All right, excellent. Well, if you haven't made it, you definitely should come out sometime. It's a really cool monument. The reason the park has been set aside was for this giant wall full of dinosaur fossils. So there's about 1,500 dinosaur fossils on this wall, still where we found them in the rock. This site was discovered in 1909, and they built a building around it in the 50s. And so people come from all over the world to see these dinosaur fossils. And then later the park was expanded to protect the Yampa and Green River corridors as well. So it's a little bit bigger than what it was when it was designated in 1915. But just for a little context, that's where I came from just yesterday. So today I thought I would tell you about the dinosaurs of Arkansas, which wouldn't take very long because there aren't that many, but they're very exciting. Most of the fossils that we have that have been found, of course, in the state are in these older rocks, these Paleozoic rocks. So most of the fossils that we see around Arkansas come from these kind of age rocks. But of course, dinosaurs lived in what we call the Mesozoic period. So dinosaurs lived during this one little period of time. And the cool thing is it was such a long period of time, just like the section of time before it, the Paleozoic. These are really long periods of time. It can be really hard to think about how much time was there. But one of the things I like to point out to people that kind of like, if you think about it, can really, you have like a Matrix moment, is how dinosaurs of Tyrannosaurus rex could have seen fossils, like actual fossils like what we have today at Dinosaur National Monument, of Stegosaurus. They didn't live at the same time. There's a lot of time separating them. So Stegosaurus lived 150 million years ago. Tyrannosaurus lives around 65 million years ago. By the time Tyrannosaurus rex was alive, Stegosaurus had been a fossil for a long time. And there's more time between Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus rex than there is between Tyrannosaurus rex and us and our iPhones. So we're closer in time to T-Rex than that T-Rex was to this animal right here, which I think just, once you try to wrap your mind around it, it's just crazy how much time our Earth has been here and all the cool things that have happened before we were here. So how do we know where to look for fossils? This is a geologic map of Arkansas. The red star is where we are today. And it's a really cool state map because you've kind of got this really distinction between these yellow rocks and these blue and pink rocks, right? So the blue and pink rocks on the map basically represent what we call those Paleozoic rocks, those rocks that were deposited before dinosaurs lived. So those rocks are really old. The yellow rocks are really new. The yellow rocks are more recent rocks, and they're overlaying the older stuff. But if I want to look for dinosaurs, and I'm looking at a geologic map, I want to go where the green rocks are. And do you see the green rocks on this map? They're hard to find. They're right there. There's not very many of them. So if I want to look for dinosaurs in Arkansas, I know I have to go where the green rocks are. So that would be where I would look at. The way Arkansas is constructed, it's kind of split into these 5 different zones. So real quickly, I'm going to walk you through these zones and where we would find these fossils and what kinds of fossils we would find in each of those zones. So I thought I would start right here where we're at, in the Mississippi River area. If you go right outside these doors, you can see your mastodon. Mastodon fossils, mammoth fossils, sloth. These are common things that we find in a period of time called the Pleistocene. So right here. We also get giant sea snakes that lived. Early whales, those were a little older here in the Eocene, Paleocene area. And you can see you could have had coastal property if you had lived here in Arkansas back then, which would be great, right? All of our coastal front property. It could be a George Strait song part 2. But they're the youngest rocks in Arkansas. So you get a lot of really younger rocks, but unfortunately, no dinosaurs. So we don't get any dinosaurs on this side of the state. When we move up to kind of northwestern Arkansas towards Fayetteville and the northern part of the state, we think about all the caves, right? There's tons of caves up there, and those caves are in what we call limestone rocks. And so we get a lot of sandstone and limestone in those rocks. And those rocks are really great. They are, again, these Paleozoic rocks, these older ones, and those were all deposited in ancient oceans. So this is what it would have looked like way back then. For just a little context, that's 170 million years worth of time spanning these 2 maps. It's a lot of time. That's a good chunk of time. The whole period of time that dinosaurs lived was about 187, give or take, million years, and humans have only been around for about 2.8 million. So it's a huge chunk of time that our part of the world especially was underwater. And while it was underwater, it was a really great place for making fossils. So we have a lot of really cool fossils that are preserved in these rocks. We have stromatolites, which are basically ancient algae. You can still see them today in the Bahamas, in Australia, in the Great Salt Lake. So these are big algal mounds. You get ammonites, like these little curled up guys. Those are pretty common. These 3 things are all the same thing. So this is a fossil called Archimedes, and it kind of looks like the spiral, and it had these little fan-shaped things. So if you check your gravel in your driveway of your house, you might find an Archimedes. They're very, very common fossils. And then you get these straight-formed cephalopods, these kind of things that look like ice cream cones almost. And then you can get cool things like these little starfish resting traces. And just today, as we were walking back from lunch, look what we found. Here on your campus. This is on your sidewalk outside. So you have starfish on your sidewalk outside, so you'll have to go walking around and see if you can find those. But you never know where you're going to find really cool fossils, and these are just right outside your doors here. You also get really neat things like trilobites. Everybody loves trilobites. Trilobites are really cool animals that kind of remind people of roly-polies. They live in the mud. They're just kind of scooting along and eating stuff out of the mud in the ocean, and sometimes they leave their tracks. So this track right here is a trilobite track, and we call that Cruziana. You can see its little legs as it's walking through the mud, and sometimes you can even see where they would kind of drift up and then land on whatever it was they were eating. You kind of get their mouth impressions. So you get little trilobite kisses sometimes in the dirt. So we find a lot of these even in Dinosaur National Monument. And then crinoids. Crinoids are so common. They're one of the most common types of fossils that you find in these age of rocks. They're really cool. I remind people they're kind of like lifesavers or Cheerios stacked on top of each other with a little plant or a little animal critter on top. And they're neat because they can be shaped all different ways. They have stars in them, they have circles, little flower shaped things. Sometimes they look like hearts on the inside. So there's a lot of variety in those. And they have a little critter that lives up on the top and kind of filter feeds. And they've been known to be used for many decorative purposes too. Native Americans have used them as beads and as decorations. And you can still find them in rock shops today where people buy them. And they're just kind of cool fossils that you can find all over the place. This is a diorama that you would see at most natural history museums. It's packed full of stuff and you're like, oh, this is so busy. But this is what the ocean floor would look like. We get brachiopods. That's what these little shell things are. This is what they look like as fossil. These are big sponges. This is a horn coral. That's what they would have looked like in life. And then even up there, again, crinoids. So kind of a view of what the ocean floor would have looked like here in Arkansas. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have these super old fossils, but we also have some of the youngest fossils in the state. So there's a place called Conard Fisher in the northern part of Arkansas that preserves, it's a cave deposit, and it preserves a bunch of dead critters, a bunch of dead animals. And here in this picture, you can see there's a chipmunk skull. This is a saber-toothed cat tooth. So you think of like a saber-toothed tiger, it's one of its teeth. And Barnum Brown, who is a paleontologist at the American Museum, shares his birthday with Darwin, just had his birthday the other day. He was a paleontologist at the American Museum. About the same time that T-Rex was discovered, he was also down here in Arkansas working on this cave deposit. And so this is an actual view of what the hole in the ground looks like. Goes down further in this, of course. But in that cave, this is what they found. All sorts of critters. And we have everything from stuff you expect to find today, like rattlesnakes and gopher snakes, moles, gophers, beavers, bears. But then you get the weird things. We had cheetahs that lived here. We have different kinds of wolves. We had these saber-toothed cats, muskox, an early version of a horse. So you have all these different kinds of animals that are living in this area. And this is really cool because caves are really great at capturing kind of a good overview of all the animals that are living in an area. So these are all the critters that were living in northern Arkansas in like the Pleistocene. So this is a pretty cool project. All these remains are at the American Museum, and honestly haven't really been worked on in a really long time, so that might be a good project for a student. But no dinosaurs. Lots of crinoids, but no dinosaurs. If you look around the Arkansas River area where Mulberry is, where I grew up in high school, a lot of the fossils that are often found are snake skin. I'll have people be like, oh, I found a fossilized snake. And they'll send me pictures and it looks like a snake. What they're seeing are these scales, and these scales actually belong to a big tree. You have one right out here in your museum that you can see, and it's called lepidodendron. And they can get really, really big. And they're just these trees that kind of grew in this kind of swampy area. Here's some different pictures of different ferns and different ways that those leaves and such grew. Really interesting, cool things, but no dinosaurs. But this is kind of cool to think about a world where you have giant dragonflies and these big old huge trees that would have been very dense, but no dinosaurs yet. And then you get down into the Washtenaws, and you get even weirder fossils. So down here you get some of the oldest rocks in Arkansas. You're getting stuff from the Ordovician, a little bit from the Cambrian, and these are some weird fossils called graptolites. And graptolites are really hard to explain because people haven't understood them in years. They're just these really weird looking saw blade things. We'll come to find out they're critters that live in the water, and they have these little tentacly things, and they can live in the water column, they can live on the bottom of the ocean, they can float on the top, they just are all in there. They're very strange critters, but we do get a lot of fossils of them in that area. We also get trilobites. So again, everybody loves trilobites. This is a trilobite head. That's kind of his nose and his eyeballs. This is one of his little cheeks, one of his little pointy cheeks. And then we get these freaks. These are the guys that like haunt our memories and our dreams, right? They're really, really weird. They're called conodonts. and conodonts are terrifying, and people have been arguing about them for forever. They're really weird looking, right? Like, I feel like this one needs some eyelashes or something to soften it up, because they're just really freaks. And what you find are all of these weird things. These are teeny, teeny, tiny. You find these under scanning electron microscopes. And what they didn't know for the longest time, what are these things we're finding? Come to find out, they're the mouth parts of these weirdos. And these are early chordates. So these are some of the earliest like proto-vertebrates that we're getting. But really, 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 really weird, but also really successful. And the only way you really find these are by dissolving rocks in acid and picking at them. Very strange things. But, you know, no dinosaurs. But yay, we finally get to the dinosaurs, right? So this is where we would find dinosaurs in Arkansas, is again where those green rocks are located. So we're looking in the Mesozoic here. We're going to be talking about Cretaceous rocks. We don't have any rocks from the Triassic or the Jurassic present in Arkansas. We need some deeper holes or some more erosion or something, but we don't have those yet. So I'm just going to be talking about the Cretaceous rocks. So yay, we have a fabulous shirt in the crowd today. I don't know where you got that, but we're gonna have to chit chat. So we've got a fabulous shirt in the audience today featuring our Arkansas state dinosaur, Arkansaurus. So this is a fun critter that was first found in the state in the 1970s. It was found down near Locksburg by a man named Joe Friday. And that's his real name. He was not a detective. He did not work at Dragnet. He's a really wonderful guy, really nice guy. I had a chance to meet him once. And he found some fossils eroding out of a ditch on his property. And they had recently removed some gravel from the property to put down on the road. And he was out looking for one of his cows and came across these fossils just weathering out of this ditch. He took them to his gas station in town and had them where people could see them. And a young man by the name of Doy Zachary, who lived down there, saw these and was like, those are interesting. And he was going to the University of Arkansas at the time. And so he contacted his professor. You see here, this is Dr. James Quinn. And Dr. Quinn was a paleontologist that worked in, he mostly worked on much younger fossils, but he recognized these as being very significant, the first dinosaur remains found from the state. So he took these, he took them to a scientific meeting and showed them around to some other paleontologists, and they tried to kind of identify what kind of dinosaur it was. But keep in mind, this is 1972. There's not actually a whole lot known about dinosaurs globally. Here's a little bit, but you know, it's not like you could email your colleague in South Africa and ask for a paper. It was, you know, it was harder to learn about stuff going on in different places. And in the Cold War, you know, it had just gotten over, and so you're not really hearing anything out of Russia. Things, you know, it's just a little quieter period of time. And so they kind of came to the determination that it was probably some sort of two-legged meat-eating dinosaur, but they really weren't sure. They went back out to his property. They looked for more material. They really didn't find anything else. And Mr. Friday donated the fossils to the University of Arkansas, to the museum. Unfortunately, Dr. Quinn died in an accident. He was out looking for fossils with one of his friends in a quarry and fell and didn't survive the fall. And so those fossils never really got described. They just kind of sat there after that. I'll say many years later, I came along and I was an undergraduate at the University of Arkansas. And at that period of time, Doy Zachary had become Dr. Zachary, and he was one of my geology professors at the University of Arkansas. And he mentioned to me, hey, we have these fossils. Have you ever thought about looking at them? I had attended my very first Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meeting as an undergrad and met Jim Kirkland. And Jim Kirkland found out that I was from Arkansas and knew that there was this one fossil in Arkansas. He's like, you have to work on that. You know, he's like this big guy, arm waving, like, you have to work on this. You have to work on this. Nobody's worked on this, so you need to describe it. So that's what I did for my undergrad thesis, is I looked at these fossils, I took them to some meetings, I talked to people. But in 2003, when I was working on this, there were only 8 taxa that this thing closely compared to, or Nithomimosaurs or Nithomimids, that kind of family. And this is a picture of Mr. Friday more recently with the foot that he found. And so there wasn't a lot even to compare it to from 1972 to 2003. So I kind of did a preliminary senior thesis on it, described it, wrote a little paper, and said that, yeah, it's probably related to ornithomimids, but we couldn't tell a whole lot from it at that point. Well, fast forward, some years later, 2017, I'm actually sitting on a trail waiting for people on Jeeps to come by so I could talk to them about dinosaur tracks when I worked in Moab, Utah. And to pass the time, I had taken a journal up there with me and was sitting there catching up on my reading. And there was a paper in there on ornithomimids. I was like, okay, so I start reading this thing, and I start realizing how much research had been done just in the period of time between 2003 and 2017. And there were up to, at that time, 21 taxa recognized. And I was like, okay, maybe I should go back and look at that now, and maybe I could do something with that. So this is what it would have looked like back then. This is, coastal Arkansas again. We kind of had coastal front property. This is where Locksburg is at. So the fossils were found in the rocks that we call the Trinity group. They're not really differentiated in this area. It's really hard. You can't see the full geologic column in this particular area. A lot of these rocks are only exposed in places where surface disturbing has happened. So kind of like this, where like a bulldozer came in and actually dug a hole in the ground, or in creeks, and in areas where there might be ponds or something like that. Anywhere where water is kind of eroded away a bank or a channel, or where they're doing mining or something like that. That's really the only place you get these exposures, because we have so much vegetation on top of the land around here. So this is what it would have looked like. These are the metatarsals. So these are the bones in the top of the foot here. This is what was really what we call diagnostic, that really helped us to be able to look at this and say, oh, this is something different than every other thing. Not to mention the geologic age. This one's from the early Cretaceous. A lot of ornithomimosaurs and ornithomimids that we know of are actually from the later Cretaceous. So that was another thing that made this particular specimen very unique. So this is what all this pieces looked like. He had a lot of toe bones, various toe bones, some claws, and the metatarsals. And that was it. That was all there was. And so oddly enough, with these kinds of dinosaurs, you often only find their feet. I don't know why, maybe because feet don't taste great. If you're gonna eat something, you usually eat the rest of the animal and not necessarily the feet. But we find this for a lot of these kinds of dinosaurs, that we actually get a lot of foot remains, which is great for comparing them against each other. Yeah, we'd like to have skulls and other things, but for the most part, we have a lot of feet. So these are what the fossils looked like. But this was a really interesting project, really great, and I learned a lot about it. And as I started looking into more stuff that's happened in Arkansas, that was kind of the main vertebrate discovery, was Arkansaurus, those fossils. And up until then, really the only other dinosaur fossils that had been found were what we call trace fossils, dinosaur tracks. So down near Locksburg, there is the DeQueen limestone that's exposed. So if you remember that from this little sheet here, here's the DeQueen. And in the DeQueen, you get all these layered limestones, right? But these are coastal limestones. So remember, we're on the kind of the coast here, and so you're getting some of that coastal influence. And in those limestones, you get gypsum. And gypsum is great for making sheetrock. And so there is a mine down there where they mine this stuff for sheetrock purposes. So they go down there and they purposefully bulldoze and move the rocks to mine the gypsum. And in the gypsum, there was a student working down there in the 80s, and he was driving his truck around and surveying the DeQueen limestone. And he just kept driving over all these potholes and didn't understand, oh, why is this so potholy? And he went to a meeting in Colorado and saw some dinosaur tracks, and like the light bulb came on, and he was like, wait a minute, those are probably dinosaur tracks. He goes back and looks, and sure enough, what he's found is one of the biggest track sites in the United States. And so he was finding all of these really big, like round tracks. Here you can see. He's mapping them. There they are with some water in them. These are big sauropod tracks. So when we think about sauropods, we're thinking about these big, long-necked dinosaurs. And then there were also a few of these three-toed tracks. So I'll come back to this. I'm going to go to a picture. I should have put this further. There we go. This is basically what those animals would have looked like. They would have looked like a dinosaur, kind of like Arkansaurus, one of these big meat-eating dinosaurs. And then we have these plant-eating dinosaurs, probably referable to Sauroposeidon. So going back, if you wanted to see these fossils today, you would have to go to the Nashville City Park next to their pond. They have a little concrete replica of one of the tracks, or you can go to the museum in Hot Springs to see a replica of these tracks. You can't go to the track site today and see them because they blew them up. And so they gave the scientists a little bit of time to come in, document the tracks, but they're really kind of in the way of what they want economically. So they let people come in, look at them, and then they blew them up, and they're in somebody's wall. There's somebody who's got sheetrocked dinosaur tracks. But at least there are digital records of photographs that they took, and then there are a few limited replicas that people can visit around the state, which is great. And I guess the town of Nashville still has a dinosaur festival in the summer. So I haven't been to one of those. I'm going to have to go sometime. Zoom forward to 2011. They find more tracks in this same area, this same mine. And this time they called the University of Arkansas. And at that point, they didn't have a paleontologist, but they had a group of students that worked on digital mapping using LiDAR. So they're scanning the ground using lasers. So they thought, oh, it would be really cool to take this technology and apply it to dinosaur tracks. So they went down there with a crew, and they had just hired Selena Suarez here as their new paleontologist. She hadn't started yet at this point, but she came down to help with the work, and they mapped out all of these tracks. So check out all these maps here. Look at all of those tracks that they were able to map. And they had to do this relatively quickly. I think they had 2 weeks to get this work done. So this is kind of maybe what it would have looked like. This is from a site in Utah, but you can kind of get the vibe of, like, you know, all these animals are kind of commingling around this kind of coastal wet area. You've got these big long-necked sauropods. We know that there are hadrosaurs, like what Dr. Poole works on here. We get ankylosaur dinosaurs, you get your big theropods. There's all sorts of great animals that we know are living in and around these areas. But the tracks that we have preserved are mostly for these guys here and those guys back there. I guess that one too. So here are some of those tracks. Pretty cool. They actually found more of the theropod tracks this time, some more of these three-toed tracks. You can see several of those here. Again, a lot of the little tracks, these big sauropod tracks. Their back feet kind of are about the size of a dinner plate. They look kind of like elephant tracks. You can actually see where their heel goes in those. And then the front tracks actually they're shaped like lima beans for their little front feet, which are kind of funny when you think about how big their back feet are. When I've dug these things up, you'll be sitting there sweeping, and you're like, what is this? And before you know it, you've got like a dinner plate size or a school bus size steering wheel round impression in the rock. And that's one of their back feet. They're really interesting. And sometimes you can even see they had claws on their toes. So sometimes you can even see the impressions of their little clawed feet, which is neat because those aren't something that always get preserved. Tracks are really informative because while the bones can tell us, where the animal died, maybe sometimes how it died or in a way that it may have died, we can learn about how quickly they grew after they're dead by studying their bones. There's a lot of things we can learn from bones, but from tracks, one of the things we can learn, we can tell how quickly they're moving. We can tell if they're maybe moving in groups or moving in a singular, by themselves. You can tell how high they are at the hip, all by doing some just a little bit of math with a calculator. You can stand out at a track site and bang this stuff out and figure this stuff out. You can figure out if they're running. One of the track sites I've worked out in Utah, we have dinosaurs that are running really fast. We have dinosaurs that are just kind of taking their time and plodding along. So you get all sorts of different things that you can learn from dinosaur tracks. So these things can be really important. So here is some of that LiDAR data. The things that I only circled one because if I had circled all of them, this whole thing would have been yellow. But look for kind of these pothole looking marks. Those are from the sauropods. And then the theropod tracks are where I've marked with these arrows. So you can actually see how far this one's going here. And when you have a track series like that, all you need are 3 tracks, and you can measure off those tracks and measure how quickly these animals are moving. These guys are all just kind of taking their time and walking along. They're not chasing anything. They're not being chased. They're just living their best life. But it's kind of cool. So this is that LiDAR data. You can even see some of the tractor trailer, some of the bulldozer marks in this, because keep in mind, this is an active mine. Here's some more of those. Really beautiful set of theropod tracks going this way this time. Here's a sauropod going that way, another theropod coming this way. And so people often ask with track sites, were there 20 dinosaurs? Were they all there at the same time? Was it the same dinosaur walking back and forth and back and forth? And those are things that we can't always tell from track sites. If there's something unique about one of the dinosaur footprints, we can tell, such as if the animal's limping maybe on one leg, and we can see, say hypothetically, this guy is limping this direction, and then we come over here and that dinosaur's limping on the same foot. We might be able to say, oh, well, those are probably the same guy making 2 passes through the area. But those are things we can learn from the tracks. This is one where the theropod was kind of moving in a little, not in a straight line, which makes sense. Again, some of those sauropod tracks and some modern ichnofossils from the bulldozer. This is a site that again, they only had about 2 weeks to work at before it also was blown up. So who knows what they'll find again. They may find more fossils, and hopefully they'll call one of the universities to have people come out and document those. So again, they were most likely these dinosaurs called Arkansaurus and Sauroposeidon. Very similar dinosaurs have been found in Oklahoma, in the same aged rocks in Oklahoma. And then we also get tracks of very similar age down in Texas as well. If you've ever been to Glen Rose, has anybody ever been to Glen Rose? Dinosaur Valley State Park? All right, one person, excellent. If you haven't been, it's a great little place to visit outside Glen Rose, and there's really nice dinosaur tracks that you can see there in the river. All right, so moving on to the Holly Creek fauna. So this is the most recent dinosaur work that's taken place here in the state of Arkansas. So here's another map kind of showing where these fossils were found here in Howard County. Locksburg's just right over here, so it's next county over. So we're just coming this direction. Those rocks we talked about earlier, all the dinosaur tracks are from this DeQueen formation, this DeQueen limestone. The rocks that the fossils I'm about to tell you about are in the one right below it. So just a little bit older than those dinosaur tracks. It's called the Holly Creek, which is why we call it the Holly Creek fauna. And then Arkansaurus, we aren't exactly sure which formation it came from, but we know that it's within this age. So it's one of those. I wish we knew better, but we don't yet. We get a lot of fish. Fish are really common at this period of time. We get skinks and turtles and dinosaurs and mammals. It's very similar in age to the Antlers Formation in Oklahoma, like I mentioned, just across the border. If you're ever driving around McCurtain, kind of that southeastern portion of Oklahoma, that's where the Antlers Formation outcrops. And there they get this dinosaur called Deinonychus. They get Tenontosaurus, these nice herbivorous critter fun. We get Sauroposeidon and some of its possible relatives. And so these are just some various dinosaurs that have been identified from Oklahoma. We also get lots of fish. Fish are strange. Fish have lots and lots and lots of bones, and they have a tendency to kind of explode in the fossil record. When we find them, they're not always, where they belong. So these are some fish bits. We get a lot of teeth. These little funny looking things here are fish teeth. This is a representation of maybe what the fish looked like. And then while looking at these fossils, we actually found some teeth that were new and unique. So we were able to say that based off of these fossils here, and there's little scale bars for you, they're teeny tiny, that this was a new species. So this is the new species name for this fish. We also get frogs and skinks. So here's some little froggy bones. They're itty bitty things. Look, that's like millimeter. Teeny tiny little frogs. We get skinks. This is a little jaw. You can see the little teeth. It's the kind of lizard you don't want biting you, probably. It wouldn't feel great. But again, this is a new one. This is one that hadn't been identified in the fossil record for this period of time in the early Cretaceous before. So this is the name that was given to it. Turtles. Turtles are so successful. We have turtle fossils all over the place. If you can't find anything, you can usually find at least a little bit of turtle. We get turtles in our Jurassic rocks. We get turtles in the Cretaceous. And then, of course, during the time of mammals, turtles go insane. There are turtles everywhere. You can't walk around without finding a turtle. I had somebody the other day that had, I work with local law enforcement sometimes, and somebody had gone out fossil collecting illegally and collected some vertebrate fossils and left them in their hotel room. It was, don't ask, very strange. But so the policeman brings me this backpack full of fossils, and we stand outside on his tailgate sorting through all these things, and it was almost all turtle. He had picked up almost all turtle because there are just so many turtles. So this is just some little bits of the shell. So again, lots of turtle shell. This beautiful skull of a crocodile. This is currently being studied. It may be this taxon of crocodile that's been identified from Texas, but currently under study, but this is probably one of the most beautiful fossils. So we're pretty, from the States as far as crocodiles go, so we're really excited to see more study going on this one. And then some other crocodile material. Little verts, teeth. These are the little hard plates, little scoots on the back of crocodiles that make them all bony. And this is what it's been tentatively identified to. So that same taxon. And then some crocodile teeth. So that's some more stuff from that site. Keep in mind too that all of this stuff was basically found in a ditch. This is like a creek / ditch where there's water coming down this area. There's steep banks. And that's where all this material was collected by a scientist named Jeff Pittman, who works down in Mina. And he collected this stuff, I believe, in I want to say the 80s. He collected this stuff when he was working on the track sites, and it just kind of sat around for a long time until we realized it was probably important to get on it and describe this stuff. And so this is what's coming from it. But it just goes to show when you're walking down these creeks, you're out adventuring, walking around, you never know what you're going to find. You might find dinosaurs. So we also have dinosaurs from this site. So again, they're the same age range for Arkansaurus and Sauroposeidon. So we do have some material that's been referred to as Arkansaurus. So this is just kind of a generalized skeleton of Arkansaurus. We have a tooth fragment. This is not from our site. This is just to show you, what a Arkansaurus tooth would look like. They're big. They're kind of cool, and they're really easily distinguishable from some other theropods. So from just having this little fragment of the tooth, we were able to identify it to that. And then these other bones. So these are some of the pelvic bones, some of the hip bones, some vertebrae, and maybe some of the forearm. You can see they're not super pretty, are they? It's not like your Jurassic Park dig where you go out and you just sweep off the dirt and there's your beautiful full skeleton. They're really fragmentary, but they're also really important. So while these might be fossils that in the late Jurassic, like at Dinosaur National Monument, these are kind of a dime a dozen. We have a lot of these, so we may not focus on these as much because we may have better specimens. Here, where in the Antlers Formation they're very rare, and in Arkansas they're even more rare, they're super important to document. So even little small fragmentary pieces like this we want to collect and note in the scientific literature so that other people can compare to them as well. Probably the best specimen out of these were this vert and this little finger bone here. And then we get Sauroposeidon, who's wailing on a Deinonychus right here, giving him a good swift kick and telling him to get away from its baby. We get some teeth. They have really funny shaped teeth. They have these teeth that are kind of like pencils. So it's kind of, imagine having a mouth full of these. You just got all these funny little peg-shaped teeth, and they're probably for stripping vegetation off of the plants. They're not chewing this material up in their mouth at all. Your mom's always telling you to chew your food. These dinosaurs are just grabbing it and swallowing it whole, and then they're kind of digesting it as they eat it, or as it's processed in their gut. We also have, again, some really fragmentary remains that we were able to identify to the humerus here, and a vertebra. Luckily, a vertebra looks like a vertebra looks like a vertebra. So this one was a little rounded and tumbled, but we were able to tell enough to say that it's probably from a dinosaur like Sauroposeidon. And then Deinonychus, we actually get some little teeth. So this is what the Velociraptor in Jurassic Park was actually based off of. It's called Velociraptor in a book that Michael Crichton was reading at the time, so he called it Velociraptor, but it's probably actually Deinonychus. And this is what their teeth look like. Pretty scary, you know, they could have messed you up. They're eating whatever they want. Probably not super big things by themselves, probably little fluff balls, but gnarly teeth, and so far all we have from this site is just that one tooth, or two teeth. We also get a nodosaur plate, which is really cool. So nodosaurs are these little armored, kind of like ankylosaurs, but they don't have like the tail club at the end of their tail. They're super cute critters. The problem is they're really armored on their back, really protected. You know, they could probably maybe hunker down to protect themselves. But if you're a Deinonychus and you can flip that thing over, it's game over. You've got a punch bowl of an ankylosaur right there to eat, because their bellies are kind of soft and gooey. And so we do find, when we do find ankylosaurs in other rocks, especially in Utah, they're often flipped upside down. And so that's my theory, is that they're the punch bowls of the Cretaceous. The poor critters are just going in there and disemboweling these poor critters. But we do get a plate, an osteoderm, from probably the shoulder region of this nodosaur, which is really cool, because we don't have any of those out this way. They don't have any of those documented in Oklahoma yet. So that was kind of cool. It's a new occurrence of something that we know is happening in this part of the world that we do see elsewhere. So when we look at these similar aged rocks throughout the United States, we get these outcrops in kind of southern Montana, northern Wyoming, called the Cloverleaf. Out where I'm at in Utah, we have rocks called the Cedar Mountain Formation. And then I was just telling you about the Antlers, and here's the Holly Creek. Those are very close to each other. And then the Arundel up in Maryland. So these are all rocks that are early Cretaceous in age, that we all know have fossils, that we have studied. Again, you can see they're kind of dominated by fish, these freshwater fish. You get lizards and turtles and salamanders, but you also get a lot of dinosaurs. So we're able to look at the fossils from all these different sites across the country and kind of compare them to each other. And one of the things that we're finding is that while things in the Antler Creek and the the Antlers and the Holly Creek are somewhat similar to what we see in the Cloverleaf and the Cedar Mountain, they more match up with the Arundel, which isn't terribly surprising. So we're wondering if this can kind of help us to understand how animals are moving to North America. Is there a period of time where they're coming in from Asia and coming over to North America, and then later there's a second, what we call dispersal, a second migration of group moving over from Europe across what was left of an existing land bridge into North America. Now, when I say land bridge, it's not like the Bering Land Bridge where they're just trotting across, you know, straight land. So all these little islands and stuff and shallow seas. So it would have taken some doing. But a lot of the fossils that we're seeing here in this period of the early Cretaceous is indicating that there's a lot of these animals that are coming in from Portugal and Spain and France and populating kind of this East Coast area, what we think of as the East Coast of North America. And then we're getting this later dispersal from Asia into North America. So that's something a lot of other people are working on, with a lot of other evidence, and there's a lot of work still to be done on that. This is by no means, you know, cut and dry, but it's interesting work that's taking place. So I do get people asking me a lot, what do I do if I find a fossil? What should I do with that fossil? Always know, especially in Arkansas, whose property you're on, because out where I live, a lot of it's federal land, but out here we have a lot of private land. So you have to think, okay, well, whose land am I on, and do they know that I'm out there? Are they okay with me poking around on their land? So always knock on doors, ask people questions. People are generally pretty nice. They're not going to run you off usually. And ask them if you mind if you walk around and look for fossils on their land. If you aren't sure, you can always check with an agency. Like if you're in Hot Springs, you might want to check with the national park because you might be on national park land. If you're in the Ouachitas, you might be on the National Forest. So you need to check about these areas because some places they do require you to have a permit to collect fossils. So you need to make sure that if you need to have a permit, you have one, or that you are okay to dig there. Usually if you're good to dig things up like crinoids, brachiopods, trilobites, usually those things are okay to collect from public lands, but you still want to double check. So for instance, like if you came to Dinosaur National Monument and wanted to collect some crinoids, you can't do that because you can't pick up anything inside a national park. But if you go across the river onto the BLM land, then it's okay because that's what we call a common invertebrate fossil. So always ask permission about whose land you're on and what you're going to be looking for. And then if you ever have any questions or you need assistance, you have a really great geological survey here in the state at the Arkansas Geological Commission. And Angela Chandler has been there since I was a student, and she's really great. So you can always reach out to her and ask her questions. She's super knowledgeable about the state of Arkansas and the fossils here. Or always feel free to email me. I still get people that email me fossils and rocks all the time. And I'm always happy to look at people's rocks and fossils because that's how I got into it too. It was by people replying to me when I was writing them letters. So always happy to answer any questions you might have. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who invited me. I kind of wanted to dedicate this talk a little bit to one of my mentors, Dr. Lear Cosson-Davis. Dr. Davis was a professor at Southern Arkansas University and was the only paleontologist in the state of Arkansas when I was younger. And so I reached out to him many times, and he was really a great mentor to me as a kid. And unfortunately, he passed away recently, and super sad. But I really wanted to kind of make sure that people remember him. He was a great paleontologist in the state. And then just thank everybody for coming today and to all these people. So happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? And remember, wait for the microphone for our online folks. Get my workout in today. There we go.
Thank you.
How are the footprints actually preserved in those areas?
So the tracks are in, at the time they would have been in mud, and then they get covered over pretty quickly to preserve them, and then over time just the compaction turns them into rock. They are getting filled in with really some of that gypsum cement, and so that's pretty soft, so that can erode out and it actually fills in the tracks and kind of keeps them nice and preserved so they don't get squished or messed up. And so when they go in and they're stripping off these layers, it's almost like a really thin layered cake. You're scraping it off. You know, think about the gypsum as kind of like the frosting, scraping off that soft frosting, and then in the harder cake layer, that's where those tracks are impressed in that. And so that's where they're finding them, is in kind of that limestone layer. But you get ripple marks on that too, where you can see there's water moving across areas. They may have been walking across like a tidal flat. Does that kind of answer your question? You're welcome. Thank you. Hey there.
What's the coolest fossil you found?
Oh goodness, this one's always so hard. You know, honestly, and this is kind of a goofy one, but I think the coolest fossil I ever found was actually a fossil inside a fossil. So I was out at a hadrosaur site at Don's Ridge once and was looking at this hadrosaur, and inside its belly region, some gravel was found. Now this may have been gravel from a stream where its body got preserved. It may have been a rock it ate. I don't know, because hadrosaurs don't usually have gastroliths. So it's probably a rock that floated in next to this dinosaur. But what was really cool is I saw this rock and I'm like, that looks funny. And I bent down and picked it up, and there was a fossil inside of it. So this dinosaur died in or near a river where there's gravel full of fossils. And so this gravel was already fossilized. It was a fossil. It was a little piece of crinoid. It washed up against this dinosaur. Then the dinosaur got covered up in mud, and they both got covered up again. And then we find them all this time later. So I think that's I think it's kind of a dorky thing, but I think it's neat to find a fossil with a fossil, especially when there's that much time between them. But I've also gotten to dig up a Brachiosaurus arm that was like 6 feet tall. So that was really cool. There's only 3 of them in the whole world. So that was pretty neat. There's so many cool ones. It's hard to pick just one. Thank you for your question.
There you go.
Okay, so I know that most of the fossils we find are very fragmented, and I saw that one of the plates was only 2 centimeters long. So at what point do you know that you're finding a fossil or a bone and not just rock?
Sure. So it's a great question because a lot of times it can be hard. You're like, is this a rock? Is it a bone? When it comes to bone, it has bone texture. So if you've stared at enough bones and you look up, you can actually see kind of the cellular texture in there. If you've ever eaten like a steak, like a ribeye or something, they've cut through that bone there and you can see little pock marks. That's kind of the inner surface of what the bone looks like. And then the outer surface can be kind of smooth or sometimes have some striations on it. And that can be a way that you can identify if it's bone or rock. Now, sometimes it's really, really, really beaten up, and it can be really hard to tell sometimes. And then sometimes it can be really easy. Some people even lick them and say if it sticks to your tongue, the capillary action in those little cells will sometimes adhere to your tongue. So sometimes people lick their rocks. Thank you. Hey there.
Have you ever found a cool fossil and accidentally broke it when you're trying to dig it up?
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. So fossils are super fragile. And I have seen people get overly excited and be like, grab this thing out of the ground and pick it up, and it just crumbles into 1,000 million pieces that will never, ever get glued back together. So that's why we don't do that. When we find something, we're excited, and we leave it there and get excited. We'll lay down next to it and take a picture if we really need to. But we leave it there. We may put some temporary glue on it to help hold it together, and we dig really carefully around it, but we don't dig up just the bone. We leave some rock around it, and we make what we call a plaster jacket around it to get it out of the ground. Then we take it back to our lab, and there, where it's nice and clean and well lit, we can sit there very carefully and clean off that fossil one little piece at a time. Sometimes the crumbs are small enough they can fit on your fingernail, and you clean off the dirt from in between them. You glue them back together, and you do that for hours, sometimes months, sometimes years. It's great. You turn on a podcast or some music, and you rock out, and you just enjoy being with the fossil. And you learn so much about it because as you're cleaning it, sometimes you can't see the whole bone. So you have to kind of think, okay, well, now I have to think like an anatomist. I have to think, okay, if this is a humerus and I've got this shape here, is the bone going to go this way? Is it going to go this way? I have to anticipate where the bone's going to be so that when I'm removing the rock, I don't hurt the bone. So you kind of have to know a little bit about the way the animals are put together and the way their bones look so that you very carefully go through that. So that's something you can learn from studying modern animals like him. You can go to med school, you can go to vet school and learn all about how these animals are put together.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
So how do you end up working at a digging site to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's several different ways. You can go recreationally, just as a person. There's several places where you can go and dig just with your family or individually, where you can pay money to go to digs. And those fossils usually stay with a museum that you're digging with. You can see if your university has any opportunities, if your school has any opportunities, because they may be looking for volunteers to come out in the field with them and help them. Those usually aren't paid positions. You usually might get fed, and you might get somewhere to camp or sleep, but they don't usually pay you for doing that kind of work. You can call up other universities or museums or even national parks or other public land agencies and ask them if they need volunteers, because we very much need volunteers quite often, especially people who are willing to dig holes and move dirt. So that's kind of how you get in on those kind of things. It's just a lot of virtual knocking on doors.
And how do osteoderms form?
Oh, goodness. Say, you've got someone right here who could better answer that question. I'm going to punt to the professional in the room who works on osteoderms way more than I do.
Yeah, we're just putting calcium in certain nodules in the body. So areas that you get a lot of, depending where it is, but you can get irritations. And a lot of times the response to most bodies and irritation is to just form some kind of calcium covering, and eventually that can turn into something like an osteoderm. In the case of like certain like lizards and lizards and crocodilians, it's more of a developmental process where it's just structures that evolve, in this case, to say protect you from getting eaten.
Yeah, right.
Are encouraging just parts of the body to get harder by just incorporating calcium and then forming it into little rocks that eventually become your bones.
So that's why you get things like ankylosaurs and stegosaurs and crocs and things that have that protection on their back. Sorry, I'm more of a geologist and less of an anatomist. I've got like the whole crew up here who can answer all those really gnarly anatomy questions for me. I'm just gonna punt. Were there any other questions?
Okay.
All right.
Let's thank our speaker one more time. As a reminder, we have a small reception in room 157. So if you exit this door and take a right, it's right down there with a little bit of food and drink. We also have surveys that we'd like you to fill out. Again, if you add your email address, you can be entered into a drawing to win a gift card. If you want to hear more about what ReBecca does, our biology department has a seminar every Friday at noon, and she will be speaking tomorrow in Arkansas Biosciences Institute, room 107 at noon. So if you want to hear more, you're welcome to join us tomorrow at noon as well. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everybody.